John, you've got the floor.
You have to go back probably 30 to 40 years to see the first elements of what they were trying to do in putting this whole thing together. In fact, you can go back to the creation of the IMF and the World Bank and all the rest, and that was the first step. And now with this current crisis, which I believe strongly that was created deliberately so that they can do this next step, is to consolidate all this into one particular unit. But let's go back into the 1990s with Secretary General Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan basically created what he calls the Track 2 documents, basically making the United Nations the world headquarters or the world government for the world. Now, they eventually wound up calling it global governance rather than world government, but you can't have global governance without a government. So it's a matter of semantics as to what they're actually trying to snow you with, and by saying that this is really not a world government. And in those Track 2 documents, you find a process by which they will be consolidating all their power into the United Nations, both financially, socially, and so forth, using a series of international treaties to lay out the legal structure for them to take control. The Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Desertification, you name it, the Treaty on the Rights of Children, and so forth, all of those are designed basically to provide an interlocking network of legal mechanisms by which the United Nations will control the world. That was in the 1990s. Late in the 1990s, they came up with a document that was talking about restructuring the financial structure of the world. And in that, 2002, in the Monterrey, Mexico, what they did is lay down a series of goals, which we are very far along now, of creating a financial structure headquartered and run basically out of the United Nations with the global banks controlling what is happening in the United Nations. They're always going to be the invisible portion of what we're seeing. You have to realize that these bankers and so forth are not going to be visible to the average world citizen. The visibility is going to be at the United Nations, at least the way they have it designed right now. They're going to be controlling the United Nations and what's happened, and out of the Basel operations of the Bank of International Settlement. Everything that came out of this 2002 meeting in Monterrey, Mexico, basically ascribed all control out of the Bank of International Settlements, which is headquartered in Basel, Switzerland. They're going to be able to control the economies of every nation in the world. They're consolidating the number of currencies down to 2, possibly 3 currencies, on their way to a total global currency. They're dividing the world up into these economic units or economic regions. They're well along on that, he talked about before the break. All of these things came out of that Monterrey meeting.
And it's all been done under the term harmonization through treaties. It looks like a local law, it looks like a local currency, it looks like a local ID, but it's already globally standardized.
That's correct. And the same thing with our security, the SPP, the Security and Prosperity Program, that particular issue, the United States, even though they have said that the SPP is dead because there's been too much exposure, they've given up on it, they just donated $1 billion to secure Mexico's southern border, which is one of the key phases of this plan to create the North American Union. It's still ongoing. They say one thing and do another. It's one of those issues.
They just came out with North American ID cards for Americans if you want to go get one. It's not a passport. It's to travel in North America, Mexico, Canada, the U.S.
Right. All of these things are done, as you just said, to harmonize our regulatory legal structures so that they're pretty transparent for the three nations. And, of course, that's nested within the free trade zones of the Americas and the emerging North Atlantic, I can't remember what the exact name is, but North Atlantic Union or whatever you want to call it. I can't remember the exact name.
Yeah, they announced that last year, early last year. That's actually in Endgame, where they announced they're already merging Canada, the United States, Mexico with the European Union through agreements. They have banking agreements, they have military agreements, they have trade agreements, they have social agreements, they have environmental agreements. They all integrate in to set up this world government.
That's right. And it's all being harmonized by the central banks of the world. And I think what you're going to see coming out over the next couple of months is having a global or world central bank, not the World Bank as we have understood it for the last 50 years.
Yeah, they're now proposing that.
Right. And it's probably going to come out, and that was right in the heart of this 2002 meeting in Monterrey, Mexico. This is one of the things that they said in this restructuring the financial structure of the world is that the IMF is likely to become retapped and reformulated into the Central World Bank, just like the U.S. Federal Reserve is for the United States. And so what we're seeing here is a rapid consolidation of this agenda that's been precipitated by this economic collapse that you and I and many others out there that are knowledgeable about this have been predicting is going to happen for over 10 years. I mean, this is nothing new to us. It's been predicted it's going to happen for a long, long time.
Well, SPP said in 2005 1945, when they set up the North American Union by stealth, that they would use economic crises, environmental crises, terror crises as a pretext to get the public to accept this.
That's correct. And, of course, they are. They're buying it hook, line, and sinker. In fact, they're liable to be voting in the very people that created the crisis in the first place in our November 4th elections. It's literally astonishing to me. I never thought I'd see the day when we would be so indoctrinated and so dazed by what the mainstream media is doing that they have turned right into wrong and wrong into right.
Well, Doctor, the good news is 90+% of the American people, 1,000-to-1 phone calls, were against the banker takeover bill, but the system did it anyways. The problem is the public isn't aware of the full magnitude of what's actually happening. I mean, the banks that engineered this are now cutting off capital to all the other free market systems, corporations, Main Street, while amassing all the currency and wealth for themselves as they depress the real economy so they can consolidate it, which was in all their Club of Rome, CFR, Trilateral Commission documents in the 70s.
Absolutely. You go back into the Club of Rome documents in the 1970s, and some of the CFR, even the Foreign Affairs publication, which was public information. They all allude to exactly what's happening today. I mean, what they said in the 1970s they wanted to do is literally coming true right before our eyes today, and very few people understand that.
Even people in our own awakening movement, whatever you want to call it, don't understand. It's here. It's now happening. Just last week, it was in Canadian papers that Canada is merging its laws and harmonizing with the EU. I mean, there it is, right there.
There it is. And, it's very, very interesting that the very same people that thought that when like the John Birch Society, and I'm not knocking the John Birch Society, but they thought that when they made their final move, which is happening right now before our eyes, people would wake up and see it. And I've always suspected that the way they would do it would be creating such a shock to the American people that the American people would be blinded by what's happening. And that's, of course, exactly what's happening. If we had truly had an economic collapse where we went back to the Great Depression days, I think the American people would be more astute than they are right now, because it's had a control collapse. We've seen a control collapse so that the average person who's out there really wants to see the fact that we will not go into a total collapse, so they're willing to support anything, basically, that the government does, except, as you said, they did not want this bailout package. And I'll have to take my hat off to them, but they should be throwing all those Democrats out of office that voted for that, and they're not going to do it. They're going to vote more Democrats.
Absolutely, and they think they're getting changed with Barack Obama.
Oh, they're getting changed.
I mean, this guy is Madison Avenue, Wall Street all the way, and he says he's going to name carbon dioxide as a deadly pollutant. Explain what that means, Doctor.
Well, basically, the polar bear, for instance, was just listed as not an endangered, but a threatened species in June of this past year. Now, what that means is that the environmental groups and a whole flurry of government agencies can now start to take action to protect the polar bears from melting ice caps, which means then controlling carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide has been declared a pollutant, a toxic pollutant. Well, it's totally ridiculous. First of all, there is absolutely no scientific supporting evidence that the polar bear isn't even threatened, let alone endangered. It is basically increased in population since the 1970s. You have higher populations in all the segments of the polar bear populations. We know that polar bears can swim hundreds of miles without drowning, in spite of what you hear on CBS Evening News. They are not being threatened. In fact, the reason they have probably been increasing in numbers is because of the decreasing polar ice cap. There's more food out there for them now because it's not covered with ice. And as a consequence, they have passed this law, basically, by declaring them an endangered or threatened species, which allows the government then to start controlling carbon dioxide and protect that polar bear from going extinct, when in fact it's all bogus right from the very start. And once that happens, when you start to see and you mentioned it very early in the program, I really, when I was talking in the 1990s, this was really funny thing. I would just talk about the fact that eventually they're going to regulate our breathing. And you said that before the ad, that they now have works in the Congress to actually regulate breathing.
Well, the New York Times had a headline like a year ago, attacks on breathing. And we're not joking. Sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. That's the four main base ingredients for life on terra firma, this planet orbiting the sun. And it means total control. Stay with us, Doctor.